En hij is aan het opnemen. Oké. Okay, I think it's about 9 o'clock, but I still see a lot of people coming in. How many do we expect actually? How many students do you know?
96.
Yes, okay.
96.
Well, let's see how many people can still reach us. I did see one message of 2 looking at the same screen, so that will take off one. And I see some of you turned their videos on. Well, most, it's great. So indeed, please do. It would be great to see your faces also in the meantime, and try to have some interaction. Let's do it a little bit longer. Well, I think let's get started. So see if people still join or not. I think most of us are here. So great. Well, seeing you all, seeing most of you. Let's briefly, my name is Trudy Voortman, and Jan asked me to give some lectures to you about, well, actually, more global health and disease again. Of course, that's the whole minor what you were talking about, global health. But today, from my perspective, actually from two perspectives. Let's say from the perspective of an epidemiologist, because I work here at the Department of Epidemiology, and as an epidemiologist, I mainly also study modifiable determinants of health and disease. So as an associate professor here, I lead the research group on nutrition and lifestyle epidemiology. So we're going to look at it from an epidemiological perspective, so looking at population numbers. And at the end, I'm going to look at determinants also of health and disease, focusing on nutrition and lifestyle determinants of health and disease. So last part of today, we'll also discuss, for example, aspects of malnutrition globally, and other changes, global changes in lifestyle that also partly explain the changes in global health and disease burden. I think process-wise, let's see, I would love to have your input during the lecture. I know that's always a bit difficult with online lectures, so you can use either the chat screen, and I think for some slides I actually have a note like, please answer your questions in the chat, so I have a quick overview of what your ideas are, but also feel free if you have a question or if you want to elaborate to turn on your microphone and ask it. There is time for that. I really don't want to just talk one direction to you for like the next 2 hours. I know that's that's not fun for either of us, I guess. So please do ask your questions, give your comments, and I'm flexible then with the topics we'll dive into a bit more today. So let's get started. I'm trying to still organize all my screens that I see you, the chat screen, and my own slides. Well, actually, let's just briefly get started. So global health and disease, measurements, trends, determinants. It's a really broad title indeed. But if we zoom out a little bit, here. So if we're thinking of health, I'm starting here with life expectancy. So there's LE already at the top, life expectancy. So this is the forecast of record life expectancy since 1850. So as you can see here, so record life expectancy, so max achieved 1850. Here, record life expectancy was about 45 years of age. And up until here, 2000, I think I have numbers here. Oh, that's not here yet. But up to like 85, 90 for some countries. I think at the moment, Japan is one of the countries in the world with highest life expectancy. There's quite some variation. But we see quite a steep steady line, right? We're increasing, we're doing actually quite good, right? When you see this, when it comes to health and well, life expectancy in this case. So we're going quite steady every, the last, well, 100, in this graph, 150 years, we gained like 45 years of life expectancy, or 40. So we're doing quite well. But we also see a few dips. Actually, I was just going to ask you what happened here. Do you see my cursor also, right? The dip, I don't know, any, see World War I in the chat screen, any other thoughts? World War I, Spanish flu, yes, yeah, great, indeed. So indeed, we had this period with also World War I, but it was mainly Spanish flu that caused this dip here in life expectancy globally. Of course, World War also caused a lot of death, but there was still a particular group. Yeah, Great Depression came after, also part of the this period. But a lot of your otherwise young men in the wars, but Spanish flu really had an impact on an overall life expectancy globally. I think I should have. Okay, I don't have that slide anymore. Okay, so well, that's it here. Well, what are major determinants? Let's see. So we're doing great overall. What made this increase happen? What do you think? Any thoughts there? I mean, it's been for quite some time.
I think mostly at the beginning it was especially hygiene and sanitation and cleaner water that made the life expectancy rise.
Yes. Yeah, great. So hygiene, indeed, sanitation, I see that also in the chat here, and that's major determinants. Because what diseases or what causes of death were prevented with that?
Mostly the communicable disease, the infectious disease.
Yes, yeah. So the reduction in infectious diseases due to better hygiene, sanitation, I see antibiotics. So indeed, a lot of tackling infectious diseases because those were the major causes of death for a long time. So if we tackle those determinants, infections, and thereby increased life expectancy and health of populations. So let's what happened here. Yeah, there's okay. Not sure if my link here still works. I'm going to show you that a bit later because I have to. Yeah. Okay. So we'll move to so what are determinants? So determinants in this case were infections. We tackled a lot of that. We'll see that also later, but not fully, and therefore increasing hepatitis. But yes, okay, Mike, I hear that my mic is disturbing a bit. Not. I don't know. She's still right. You can maybe write in the chat screen if this is, can you hear me okay? Or if there's still some issues. Kyle, sorry, for the break can you hear me? Okay, like this. Yes? Okay, I try to close everything I don't need and connect to internet cable rather than Wi-Fi, so I hope any connection issues, yeah, are okay now, but let's, yeah, those fingers crossed. uh, and yes. Good. So let's see. We were talking about life expectancy. Global life expectancy has been increasing. We saw the Spanish flu here, and we discussed determinants. So how did we what did life expectancy increase? Well, this is one, okay, a little bit different question. So where are we going? Do you think this line will keep on increasing like this? Are we just going up? Do we continue the linear trend? Any thoughts? Can be either via the chat or you can unmute. Maybe first, do you think this will be, this will continue? Will come stable, depends on, yeah. Yeah, okay, Arya says there's a biological max. Eventually there will be a limit, yes. Yeah, this is very interesting, right, to just think about, because this is quite, we tend to think this, okay, but at some point there must be a maximum. But what if maybe in 1850 people were also thinking, I know, 45, but it's never going to be more than 70, at some point there must be a max. So I think it's good. Of course, we know of some biological systems like, yeah, that must end at some point, but why not? We can, it's good to, well, think about that a bit. So maybe not. So we could have a biological maximum we can hit. But other things we just discussed, okay, we tackled major determinants of infectious diseases to have this increase, but are we still sufficiently tackling all the determinants of current major causes of death? So are we still, well, doing the best we can in terms of determinants, aside from, because a biological maximum or a limit somehow suggests that the rest is all optimum. We tackled infectious diseases and everything else, but at some point our bodies are just, this is the best we can do. But there may be also other factors that may prevent us from increasing life expectancy further. Well, and then there's one question I sort of one answer already, like how long would you want to live? Just to think about it. And I think I saw who was saying that. Marlou already mentioned, like, depends on the quality of life. So I guess we all agree there. So we want to live forever, up to 80, 100, 150. Depends on health, quality of life, right? So that brings us immediately to the other topic, or one of the limitations here. We're discussing now life expectancy, mortality, but of course, just a number of years lived is not the best indicator of health or of quality of life. So it might not be the best indicator. But what we do in practice, actually, if we want to measure health, global health, ideally, we want to measure this. Well, this is a WHO definition. I'm sure you've seen it around. Complete mental, physical, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease. And we were just discussing not even just the absence of disease, but just pure years lived. And this definition actually has been criticized quite a bit, maybe being too utopian, right? So I don't know how many of you feel completely healthy if you look at this definition. So complete mental, physical, social well-being. Are we all healthy here all the time? So has been criticized. Okay, this maybe a bit too much, but still. So if we want to measure health, if we want to measure how populations are doing, if we're doing better or not, it's also very difficult to operationalize this or to quantify this, right? So how do we indeed measure if a person is healthy? If we can say it's not just years lived and it's not just the absence of disease or infirmity. So in practice, what we usually do is measuring mortality and disability. So with all the numbers, I'm going to show you also that that we're going to compare countries, or we're going to compare trends in time, are mainly based on mortality rates and in line with that, so life expectancy and also disability adjusted life expectancy. It's a little bit well, it takes at least a little bit into account how the what quality of life is. So we'll discuss that in a bit. So just to have an idea that ideally when we would want to measure a lot more detail if we're measuring healthy populations, but usually this is all we have. And yes, see if we have mortality rate. So there are quite a lot of, well, that's been recorded, or it's being recorded, WHO here by for many countries and in time. And let's see. And I'm too scared of open graphs now with my internet connection, but let's see. Okay. Nope. Okay, that's okay there. I'm trying that for after the break. I'll open some some browsers screens. Okay, top first. Okay, we're back to mortality. Top global causes of death. So we just saw trends increasing in increasing life expectancy was due to indeed tackling infectious diseases. What are currently the top global causes of death globally? I'm sure you discussed that in some of your courses, but there's still infectious diseases, some others. So what is like the top 5? I see in here writing ischemic heart disease, stroke, put it at Max. Hi, yes. Yeah, ischemic heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, malaria. Yeah. Okay, now we still have some, some infectious disease as well, TB, COPD. Yeah, oh, interesting. Yeah, several. I'm gonna show you top 5 here from 2016. I did see a lot indeed stroke and ischemic heart disease or coronary heart disease. Those are indeed number 1 and 2 globally. So this is really, right, including Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, etc. COPD, just saw that Michael wrote that, indeed, it's quite high. Still have here low respiratory infections, and actually now dementia is like new in the list. It's steeply rising. It's been steeply rising in the last few years, also in the way it's measured and documented as a cause of death. And I saw diabetes, it's also in there, but also mainly as a determinant, of course, is coronary heart disease and stroke. Diarrhea is also still high, but just not in the top 5 anymore. And let's see. Okay, I'm gonna try this anyway, and otherwise, because it does differ, of course, a lot per region. Great. So I keep updating these numbers every time I give the lecture. So these are the latest, and if my connection works. Okay. Never mind, we'll continue here. So mainly what I just mentioned, so some like indeed diarrhea, lower respiratory infections, and TB have been going down in this list, and the ones that are coming up also. We have cardiovascular diseases up here for quite some time, but also now dementia, diabetes, etc. So other non-communicable diseases generally becoming more major causes of death, and the other ones going down. You see these trends across different WHO regions. So of course, in Sub-Saharan Africa and in some regions of the world, infectious diseases are still more prominent, but we see these trends rapidly everywhere. Let's move on. Then what we just discussed also life expectancy versus healthy life expectancy. So overall life expectancy was 71 at birth in 2015. globally. So with life expectancy is always good. We have to specify at what age, right? So we usually mean it's life expectancy at birth. So a child that's been born now, or in this case in 2015, what is its life expectancy? Because your life expectancy will increase once you get older. Because you already survived certain critical periods, for example. So that's always important to consider. But then healthy life expectancy was only 63 years globally at the same time point. So there's already an 8-year gap here of unhealthy life years. And actually, of course, what we want, I mean, it's great if we can live longer, but what we want is to live longer healthily. So we don't want to increase the number of years we live with disease, but actually the healthy life years. So let's see, then we're going to dollies. Actually, have you discussed dollies before? Or do you know the term? Yes, I see some people nodding, then will be great, we'll go there fast. So just briefly, needs or disability adjusted life years. So we take into account, actually this is a gap measure, right? So the years you lose. So it's years of life lost and years lived with disability. And for the years lived with disability, there's a weight. So okay, well, just one example then, just as a recap. So for example, this person had a life expectancy here, well, was supposed to live until 2035, but actually died in 2005. So there's 30 years, life years lost. This person lived for 5 years with diabetes. Then we say, okay, then those years count for only 80%, which is of course a bit, it's difficult, but there's tips for that. So 5 years times 0.2 is another year lost, another net year lost due to disease. So in total 31. Is that still, you have that? Okay, I see some people nodding, that's great. Good. So, and I'm gonna on there. So we had the dollies, actually those are the negative, so the years of life lost, just for clarification. And you have the qualies, and maybe you may see those also. That's actually the inverse. So that's the years lived in perfect health. So they complement each other. So here, this, okay, now this person, don't even, 80, yeah, 80, life expectancy was 80, 31 years lost. So the qualies were then 49 and 31. Okay. So here also in the scheme. So usually we're talking about dollies, but sometimes qualies are used. Just know that one is the positive and one is the negative version. Okay, so well, we've seen top global causes of death. Then what about global causes of dollies? So if we take into account disease burden. So what do you think will be in the top then? Or what do you think may be different? Okay, yes, I see. Some people already need mental disorders, depression, mental. Oh, hey, maybe you've seen this before also. Yeah. Yeah, great. Like the tropical diseases. So in this case, because in dollies, it's determined based on years lost. So of course, major causes of death are still very important, the same. But we're adding those diseases to the list that have a strong effect on quality of life for a lot of people for a long time period, because those, of course, are the most important in this case. Yeah, okay, so you need a question. So here, and I'll show them now, because one I saw already, a major one indeed is low back pain. Actually, mental health diseases are not here in this list, but they're also still a lot higher up here than they are for total life expectancy. Insufficiency, yeah. So you're indeed on the right track. Yeah, diabetes is also definitely going up here. So, but what you see generally here, well, the diseases, for example, low back pain, it's so high up because there are so many people suffering for a very long time period that's how it goes up in these global measures. So there's some other aspects that may really affect your quality of life, but they're not that common. But mental health, but also your low back pain, because it's of course fortunately not a disease you're dying of, but you could live with it for 60 years and it can have a major effect. Okay, but otherwise we still the same. Coronary heart disease, stroke, diarrhea also still quite high up here. Actually, preterm birth complications would be interesting. So that is also because it can have an effect over your entire life course, right? If you had complications at birth affecting, well, your optimal health, then that will count for the rest of your life, right? So that will have also a major burden or a major effect in these global health measures. Okay. Then trends. So we already actually discussed that. I'm just going to go a bit more further. And you've heard that probably a lot. Infectious diseases going down, non-communicable diseases going up. So these trends generally everywhere to be seen. And of course, now we have an interesting, we'll come to that phase. Yes, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to have a few, so we're discussing trends in time, a few models that I'm going to show. First, a demographic transition, then an epidemiological transition, and a nutrition transition. So changes we've seen in time globally. So the demographic transition model is already almost 100 years ago described by Warren Thompson to describe populations. And if we're talking about aging populations, etc. So what we see in time, so let's say x-axis is time in this case, we've seen total population growth because death rate decreased while birth rates stayed quite high. And at some point we see birth rates also going down and maybe even stabilization of population growth. And so we're describing here birth and death rates. When death rates go down because indeed of improved health. And at some point we see with development of most populations also birth rate going down again. Yeah, you see that a bit also here, different regions in the world, different stages of the transition. Not many groups here, fortunately. Still quite a lot of countries where there's still this very rapid increase because death rates go down, but birth rates are still very high. And on the other hand, you see now populations, and maybe Germany, for example, where there's first countries are, okay, maybe it's at least natural population growth is stabilizing or even decreasing. Corresponding to that, we see changes in diseases. So this is the epidemiological transition described by Umran in the 70s already. It's quite an interesting, descriptive paper. So the theory of epidemiology of population change, so about the distinct causes of death in this demographic transition. And he describes as the first stage would be, I'll see that in a bit, that the stage of pestilence and famine, so really major cause of death were wars, the Black Plague, etc. Then moving on to, more the pandemics, receding pandemics, cholera and other those pandemics. Then going quite fast already to stage 3, receding, so with less infectious diseases and pandemics, more non-communicable diseases, so heart attacks and strokes, increasing. And actually then the 4th he describes is, maybe we'll get better and better at treating also cardiovascular diseases. We're moving more to a stage of delayed degenerative diseases, so we'll talk about dementia, Parkinson's, etc. Yes, and then one question I usually, been asked, I think here for the last years when I give this lecture is what is the next stage according to you? So with cardiovascular diseases, cancers, dementia, so moving from infectious to non-communicable diseases. So I'm still quite curious to hear your thoughts now. And then I'll go back also to the other questions in the chat screen. or anyone who wants to comment, I'm muting. So what is our next, this stage where we're going to? Mental, yeah, health. Yeah, dementia. So that's already a bit in stage 4 actually, but indeed. And what if we go even, you know, where we're able of treating dementia, cancer, cardiovascular disease, everything? Then are we indeed going to live forever? Climate change, yeah, interesting. Lifestyle, of course, already major determinants of stage 3 and 4. Yeah, and then Max is just saying here back to communicable because of antibiotic resistance. Well, and we can even say, so yeah, natural disasters. Okay. So, I mean, what we're currently experiencing, right, is already going back a bit to communicable diseases. So at the moment we thought we were only tackling mainly with indeed cardiovascular disease, cancers, but with current COVID, we return maybe of viruses, antibiotic resistance, of course, is a major. So I think I have some notes here. Yeah, so it could be reemergence of infectious diseases, parasitic, and that because of also we have improved travel, but also poverty, but and yeah, what we just discussed here. And indeed related to that, natural disasters, climate change, what's happening to the environment. So all these factors may be important. So this is just speculating, of course, on what will be the challenges of the future in global health. I think, yes. Then maybe also briefly back. So there was a question, and there were two actually, Arya and Olivier, about non-communicable diseases. Are they actually going up, or are we more focused on them because communicable diseases gone down, or is it indeed better detection? So that's an interesting thought. That is, of course, part of it. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that or has any thoughts. Question. So indeed, about our non-communicable disease actually going up? Well, partly we say now we live long enough. So if we survive infectious diseases or survive those periods of risk, for example, early childhood where a lot of infectious diseases occur, I mean, we live long enough to be able to develop cardiovascular diseases, etc. Like we see now. So this is always related, right? So we don't die of pneumonia or diarrhea when we're 5 or 40. Then we have the chance to develop atherosclerosis and develop cardiovascular disease. If we can treat cardiovascular diseases, we have an MI, but we don't have to die of it because of medical advances. Then we can get old enough to develop cancer, for example. So this is, of course, related. So it's because communicable diseases go down, we develop non-communicable diseases, and partly, of course, we can detect it. But there are some interesting studies, like even like some mummies or some other that they later measured their arteries. So there was people who died in their 40s centuries ago. They already had atherosclerotic plaques. So for example, probably they didn't die of a cardiovascular event, they died of something else, but they were also developing atherosclerosis. I see someone showing their mobile phone screen. I'm not sure if that's so it's related. So it's not new. It was, but we're able to develop it, and it's progressing because our age is advanced. I don't know if that's any other comments or thoughts on that. Also from, I don't know, Arya or Olivier. Then let's move on. Yes. Okay, well, of course, the demographic and neurological transition, yes, thank you, are strongly related. So we see them here, this decrease in death rates, birth rates, and here infectious diseases and non-communicable diseases. There's really a clear trend in time and in different populations because this death rate here was due to a decrease in infectious diseases. So NCDs, oh yeah, I'll keep updating these numbers as well, and just left this to sort of show you that well, in 2016, then the latest numbers of WHO at more than 40 million deaths, and 71% were due to NCDs. So it's really the major part of deaths worldwide. So the communicable, including maternal and neonatal, is only 20%, which is still, of course, major, and it's still very important. But this one is going a lot. And actually the largest increase in death from NCDs, from non-communicable diseases, happens in developing countries. So I think, okay, let's hear some numbers. Well, indeed, so trends death from infectious diseases and from NCDs. This is 2006 to 2015, but the major increases here you see Africa, Eastern Mediterranean. So the large increases occur there. But sure that. So indeed, about 3/4 of NCD deaths occurred actually in low and middle income countries. But then, okay, you probably heard about the MDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. Let's see a few, yes, okay. But are these covered? This is the non-communicable diseases. Actually, not really. There is still, and it makes sense, it's still a lot of focus also on maternal and child health, on tackling infectious diseases, sanitation, hygiene, which is great, but we really should not ignore this sort of pink elephant in the room that's there. We sort of ignored it, that especially in low and middle income countries, where this the NCDs is increasing so rapidly. And actually here only in 2012, the UN with this resolution to tackle non-communicable diseases globally. So here they agreed this 25-25 target to reduce the 4 main non-communicable diseases, so CVD, COPD, cancers, and diabetes by 25% by 2025. 25 target. So they wrote this, or that to tackle non-communicable diseases specifically, and the WHO wrote in response a global action plan for prevention and control of NCDs. I think. Okay, yes, a little bit more, and then let's take a short break also. So the UN wrote this as that made this goal. We should reduce also NCDs by 2025, and WHO then made this plan to do that. So how should we do that? So how should we reduce the burden of NCDs, or deaths from NCDs in this case, globally? Any ideas? You can really write your thoughts in the chat box. I think I have it here. Yes, so population-wide reduction. So earlier on, we were discussing how to, how infectious diseases were reduced. Great. I see a little interesting. You can write some more if you want. That's good. Yeah, well, definitely prevention overall. So to prevent better than to cure. Also you have NCDs, and then I see more specifically already taxing unhealthy foods, better lifestyle, diet, etc., tobacco use, and then the taxes again. It's a hot topic again now, the sugar tax in the Netherlands again. Didn't get through, unfortunately. More research, always good. And vaccines, for infectious disease, again, God's cancer, definitely like the PV in part of it. But I think, well, we see indeed overall is a lot of lifestyle factors, more general, and some specific options for the texting. Let's see, because indeed, well, of course, we're thinking then of if we want to reduce the burden of NCDs, we have to tackle the determinants or the top risk factors of NCDs. And actually, global risk factors for death globally, actually, first is dietary risks, then we have hypertension, tobacco, so a lot of lifestyle related factors. Alcohol use, high BMI, low physical activity. So major determinants, so this is just death globally, not even specified for NCDs, but of course NCDs take a big chunk of that, are lifestyle related indeed. But of course we discussed it's not just mortality, it's also DALYs, but also there we see the same factors. Here's a diet, smoking, alcohol, etc., and obesity. So this was what the WHO developed in their global action plan. Actually, these are the 9 targets. I don't know if you could just maybe briefly read them, and then maybe any first thoughts, anything that you find striking or that you maybe miss in this list? Ayer's writing, indeed, there's nothing about mental health. It's indeed not at all in here. So that may be indeed the sort of factor that again in a few years, like, wait, we all forgot about that, right? There's still, like, even for NCDs, I agree that it came a bit late, but no, there's nothing in the WHO about that. Well, there's some in here about treatment, of course, here, medicine technologies, and then we have lowering tobacco, etc. What do you think of this one? Diabetes, obesity, the aim, the target is 0% increase. Isn't that a bit, I don't know, not really ambitious, or is it? So that was sort of it. So here for the aim, you know, it's really, yes, it's really ambitious. Yeah, this was so good. Yeah, because with the current trends, we're increasing so rapidly to even stop the increase is ambitious. And actually, I mean, all the modeling studies so far show we're never going to make this by 2025, unfortunately. And I think he was already saying there's nothing about eating healthy, so he needs more treatment. Of course, it's a bit in there indirectly with the obesity, but there's no really direct focus on that. Actually, let's think about this a bit more, and let's take a short break, and then we'll discuss these targets in a little more detail for the last part of the lecture. Let's see, what do you say? 10-15 minutes? What do you usually also for online lectures? Should we start again at 10:05? 10:05? Yeah. Then, yeah, great. Then have a coffee, take a break, and I'll see you again in a bit. And we'll still have about half an hour, a little bit longer left. Okay, welcome back, everybody. See a few people, yes, open their video also again. Great. Some people still having breakfast or having coffee, I see. Good. Great. So let's see, the last part of this lecture. So brief recap already, we've seen an enormous increase in life expectancy, but an enormous transition also in the causes of death that we're globally dying from, right? Generally, reduction in infectious diseases, increase in non-communicable diseases, with then corresponding demographic transition and with this epidemiological transition. And then major determinants, so major determinants of earlier reducing infectious diseases, sanitation, antibiotics, etc. And now how to tackle also the burden of NCDs. And this is the WHO plan, the action plan to reduce the burden of NCDs, or to at least for population-wide reduction in deaths from non-communicable diseases. I'd like to highlight a few for the last part. So we're discussing a few of these lifestyle factors and how, well, there's still a problem, yes, no, in different parts of the world and what the trends are. And again, let me open also the chat screen again. Yes, so again, if you have any questions, comments, also feel free to just unmute or use the chat screen. So if you will, maybe tobacco use first here, 30% reduction is the aim by 2025. In this case, I don't know what you think of tobacco use or what you see around you, but we've quite seen overall globally here a strong decrease in smoking prevalence. So this is prevalence of smoking globally, 1980 until about now. I don't know if that's your experience in your environment, but see overall that there has been a decrease. Okay, great to reduce that further. However, this is the global trend also. This is a global prevalence. Like we've seen with epidemiological transition and demographic transition, it's a trend in time, but also different parts of the world are in different stages of those transitions. And we can even say there's sort of a tobacco, stages of the tobacco epidemic. In time, there's been a reduction or is this reduction in smoking, but not every part of the world is in that same stage. So what we see here is if we have, this is, let's say, a time axis, the blue line are the male smokers, the pink one are the female smokers. Maybe too stereotypical, but okay. So we've seen a steep increase first, male smokers, and now a decrease. Women started later. But unfortunately almost caught up and also decreasing. And then the dotted lines I see are death due to smoking. And of course, there's an enormous lag time in between because you don't generally die immediately from smoking. And there's even decades in between before you have these the effects. So we have the line here of death from smoking in men. And in women, unfortunately, we see it's still even increasing. So we don't see the effects directly yet of the decrease in smoking prevalence. So in most, in Europe and US, this steep increase, smokers actually started around like World War II and after, so it seems a strong increase. But, and we're now sort of here, Western Europe, US, decreasing. But there's still a lot of regions in the world where there's still a major increase at the moment. So here you can also say some, especially Asian countries, where actually smoking prevalence is rapidly increasing still. So we sort of see the same trends occurring, but same countries in different stages. So it's, if we just summarize it, as we just saw, okay, but globally there's been a decrease in smoking, so we're doing fine, taking into account that, okay, that may differ a lot for different parts of the world. So in some countries, this may still be, well, at least try and prevent that they're following exactly the same curve. Yeah, and actually here, almost 2 out of 3 of the world's smokers live in just 10 countries. China, India, of course, the major countries in terms of population size also. But smoking is still a major problem in many parts of the world. Okay, I'll go here, then we'll immediately go to the other, to alcohol use. Actually, well, yes, should we have that discussion, healthy or unhealthy? What do you think if you think of alcohol use? Yeah, good. This is maybe also too simplistic question, but also good that you reply at least with unhealthy. Of course, there's still this, at least for some people, let's say maybe even some generations thought like, okay, but a little bit of alcohol is good for you. 2 or 3 glasses a day are fine, keeps your blood flowing, etc. But we see more and more that even 1 or 2 glasses per day is not good for your health. So of course there are some. There was this French paradox, some trends of some cardiovascular outcomes. 1 glass per day may be fine, but overall at the end, like net effects on health, also 1 or 2 are unhealthy. And then interestingly, I think this is a nice overview of study. I won't go into details, we don't need to go there, but of health effects of alcohol on various diseases, but it's also stratified by high income and low income countries. And actually, yeah, I'm not even gonna, this can be confusing. But we also see that most harmful drinking actually occurs in lower income countries. So there, even any potential health benefits of low alcohol, we don't see them there. And we see a lot more because, of course, it's not just cardiovascular diseases. Of course, cancer we know strongly increased with alcohol, but also injuries and etc. But we see it mostly in lower income countries. There's a lower frequency of drinkers, so there are more people not drinking at all, but we generally see that those who do drink alcohol have an unhealthy also pattern of alcohol consumption. So there are higher rates of high and heavy episodic alcohol consumption. So even if we say, okay, is alcohol good or bad, it may even be worse in lower income countries, and impact on overall population health. And it's also important thing that, so even if you think, okay, but the country, for example, I'm visiting, or because it's interesting to look that up, how are these lifestyle factors distributed where you're going, maybe you will read somewhere like, 80% of the population does not drink alcohol. It could be religious reasons or just culture, but still those who do report drinking, so how much do they drink and is that problematic? Yes, no. So there's often this a big difference there. Okay, and we'll go fast. So move already to, there's always no more questions, and yeah. Salt sodium intake. 30% reduction is the aim. When I wrote here, need why specifically salt? Because someone wrote already earlier, there's no aim of eating more healthy. Actually, this is the only one that is directly referring to diet and dietary intake. If you can write that also. So why sodium? Why is that so important that requires a separate target? Everybody's maybe like, this is too obvious, but yeah, okay, coming up, hypertension. Yes, blood pressure, hypertension. And that relation is so strong, the effect is so strong of salt, yes, on hypertension and therefore cardiovascular disease. And it's such a major contributor. I think many people don't realize that if you're thinking about unhealthy diets, fats, sugars, etc. But salt is actually by far the most important contributor to disease globally. So high salt intake. And here, yes, because indeed when we split, we saw earlier that dietary risks are the #1 for determinants of death globally. If we split that up, we see indeed high sodium intake as major determinant. And well, high blood pressure, and that's also, we saw that here, dietary risk are #1. High blood pressure in itself already is #2 as determinant of death. So, and of course, it's difficult to disentangle because they're also strongly correlated, but high blood pressure, leading risk factor for mortality. I wrote here highest in which regions. Actually, highest prevalence of the WHO regions is in Africa at the moment, lowest prevalence in the Americas. May sound counterintuitive, but I'm just going to give that already, let's discuss, but it's also really because of poor treatment. right? So here, if you go to your GP, you have slightly increased blood pressure, you immediately get medication to control it. So actually hypertension prevalence is a lot higher here, maybe in Africa. And sodium intake is like the major factor contributing. So if we'd even reduce salt intake from like 10 grams per day to 6 grams per day, and 6 is current recommendation, 10 is the current average, that would prevent 2.6 million stroke and heart attack deaths worldwide, for example. This is enormous, right? If you think it's just simply changing your diet. Of course, sometimes it's not that simple, otherwise we would have all done it. But it could, save so many deaths if you think about prevention also in this case. I think I have, more examples here. Yeah. No, time-wise, let's not go into too much depth there, because I can discuss a lot otherwise on sodium and health. Okay, let's do one example here. Yes, okay, I'm gonna take one example here to discuss population strategy of prevention. So this reduction indeed, so 10 to 6 grams would prevent a lot of cases globally. So this is actually a nice one because the WHO action plan is also on population-wide reductions of CVD. So just to think about that, so that's indeed shifting whole populations, so risk factors of whole populations. So there are mean levels of blood pressure, cholesterol, but blood glucose, for example. So not so much targeting those at high risk, but targeting everybody, because we're all, in a sense, ultimately high risk. So shifting mean levels, and I'd like to use that as to briefly discuss the population strategy of prevention, so not public health paradox. Because what we usually do in medicine, at least, we measure blood pressure, for example. Here somewhere we cut the line. Here, hypertension or normotension. Here you suddenly have a disease, you get medication. Here you're fine. And of course, if you look at it, well, here also it's a continuous scale. If you look at it from biological, just normal perspective, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because what we see is just a normal distribution of blood pressure in the population. And we somehow here decide, okay, this is where we think it's good or bad. And of course, we need that for medical decision making. We need those cutoffs. But if we want to look at determinants or look at solutions, so we were to say, okay, this is a problem, we're going to do something, and this is fine. And that was already earlier described also, and this is in public health also in theory, like at the binary, to depart from the binary thought, like the 0-1. It's not like healthy disease, it's a continuum, and it may be important to shift the whole continuum a bit. Jeffrey Rose wrote more about that. If you want to specialize more public health, great books. So what he also described is, okay, the problem is not here, those that are really at high risk. The problem is that this whole distribution has been shifting. So we're all, overall populations, for example, have a higher blood pressure. And of course, those people are at higher risk for disease. But the problem is the shift of the whole curve. So what we want to do is also shift the whole curve a little bit back to the left, rather than targeting just this group. So this is population strategy approach. So to shift this whole curve a little bit to the left, rather than treating only those here. So I think I have, so rather than trying to force those people back to mean levels, we're gonna shift that. And you can look at, in this case, let's indeed say blood pressure. Then, let's see briefly any advantages or disadvantages of this. Are there any things you think, okay, that's like makes sense or not? Because there are also actually quite some disadvantages of this approach. Do you have any, if you can write that or discuss? So what indeed, for example, blood pressure, we're trying to lower everybody's blood pressure a little bit. Some messages coming in. Great to hear more thoughts. Yeah. No, some great indeed notes here already. Well, Mom, maybe it's interesting. So isn't it obvious? It says that you also need the high risk population approach. Well, I guess that you can discuss about that. Is it that? Is it? Do we need to really do that, or should we put our efforts on the whole the curve here? Because of course there are still people here that may get a disease due to relatively high blood pressure, and there may be people here that will never get a disease, even though they are. So it's of course a little bit arbitrary where we put the cutoff. But of course, in practice, we would be unethical not to treat the high risk group if we have treatment options. And then, of course, here high costs and related to that. So high cost because you treat everybody. Also, those that may not need it, but you can say that could also occur now, and only a small group of people benefit. And that is a bit indeed like I think the core of the population approach here is that you, let's say, treat, because that's something to discuss later. Is it really a treatment, or you treat everybody? You treat a large group to prevent disease in a small part of the population. But on a population level, it'll definitely maybe you'll reduce. We just talked cardiovascular disease incidence by 10%. So on a population level, it will have an effect, but for a lot of individuals, it won't have a direct benefit for them individually. So does it benefit the individual versus the population? So in this case, and is it worth it? And then is it worth it in terms of money, but also is it worth it in terms of other risk factors or any other issues? We can see that here, but you may think, okay, what if you lower a blood pressure of someone who is already at the low end of the curve? Blood pressure is not so problematic, but still, you may get problems there. Is that ethical? So is it worth it in terms of cost, investment? It's at several levels. What we do see is that for a lot of these like overall population health costs, it's worth it. Like this approach, the population, there's some modeling studies at the end, it reduces or it prevents more disease cases than only this approach. But is it worth like bothering everybody? So then you should say, okay, treatment. So indeed, should you treat everybody? So that's of course one. We should all take a poly pill or something, or put statins or in our drinking water because it'll help. Or is it really treatment? Is it medical treatment? Or is it something like indeed salt intake or improving physical activity? Because that's of course you can say, okay, more these lifestyle factors. Wouldn't that be important to just focus on everybody? So to shift this whole distribution rather than only focusing here. And no, I don't have that example here. So, but just to go back to salt, for example, I don't know the major. I don't know if you know the major source of salt intake in the Dutch population, actually. So, where do we get most salt from? Or how could we reduce salt intake? Yeah, bread, great. Yeah, fast food, but yeah, so that's something we think of. And if fast food has a lot of salt, but because bread also it has a lot of salt, but also we eat it every day, at least generally Dutch population, bread is the major source. It's a bit counterintuitive again, or difficult, because you don't want to recommend people to eat less bread, because of course whole wheat bread specifically is healthy and also recommended part of the dietary guidelines. So one example I really like that fits this population approach without so much costs or issues for population itself is at the last decade now or so, salt content of bread in the Netherlands has decreased. So we're now already about 10% lower than we were. So, and I'm sure none of you noticed. Because that's because the whole most bread in the Netherlands, it's coming from just a few bakeries, a few factories. So they just all agreed like, okay, if our product is contributing so much to disease risk, we don't want that. So let's try and reduce the salt contents stepwise, just a little bit at a time, because of course it has implications for the whole process of making bread and for our tastes. Because they did that all together, we didn't really notice. So it's more than like 95% of all bread sold in the Netherlands. So we didn't really notice, but overall, we're already consuming less salt as a whole Dutch population. So, and well, we don't see it translated yet, but in health effects, but we can imagine that if we all like this, without even being aware, without having risk or having to make cost or anything, we consume a little bit less salt. The whole population's blood pressure curve will probably lower just a little bit, of course, just a tiny little bit, but in the end, that will save cases of cardiovascular disease. So it's like a nice, harmless and successful approach of the population approach to reduce NCDs. Time-wise, yes. Okay, let's move on briefly to now diabetes or obesity mainly. And yeah, related to that. So should discuss this also already, but overweight and obesity, of course, major determinant of NCDs and also a mediator between, for example, indeed unhealthy diets, low physical activity and disease. Do you know what percentage of the adult population is overweight or obese? If you can write some numbers in the chat. So global population. I hear 30, 40, 50. It's like we're 20, 40, 45. Yeah, well, you're all actually really close. So we're right now, well, this is 2016, actually like 39% of the world population. But still, I think it's shockingly high, right? Like, yeah, about 40% of the world population having overweight or obesity. And we know it's such a major risk factor. And it's increasing. It's been increasing so rapidly. It's nearly tripled since 1975, and it's still overall it's still rapidly increasing. So what we see in the most developed countries, a bit like smoking, that at least for developed countries, increases have begun to slow down. So we in the Netherlands now we're thinking, great, maybe yeah, it'll stabilize a bit. We'll stabilize at about 50% actually of the Dutch population being overweight or obese, but in most developing countries, these rates are still rapidly increasing. So again, different phases of this transition, so going up rapidly. And yeah, and I think the scary thing is that it's also really affecting young children. There's so many, most of them, yeah, they're like over 40 million overweight and obese preschoolers worldwide, under 5 even, and most of them live in developing countries. And we know that when you have overweight or obesity as a kid, you're so likely to remain overweight or obese as an adult and have risk of early NCDs. So I think one of the main threats. Now, well, what causes obesity is something you can go into a lot of layers, but the first layer is actually just more energy in and less energy out, right? It's first we'll start with simple physics, and of course there are a lot of determinants of that. But we've seen that on both sides of the scale, we've seen effects globally. So we've seen an increase in energy-dense foods, but also, oh wait, yeah, it's correct. I think it's an increase in physical inactivity, double negative. So indeed also changes in work, transportation that made us also a lot less active. Oh, yes. And I'm gonna move faster here. So we've seen indeed both, if we look at transitions, we've seen that people start eating more unhealthy, but also exercising a lot less. And then exercising, of course, not really as in sports participation is what we think in, but because of all these shifts, of course, in sitting behind our computer all day versus having a physically demanding job, or etc., or taking cars or public transport instead of walking. So we've seen enormous transitions. And actually that's been described also by Barry Popkin in sort of nutrition or lifestyle transition. So we discussed this morning already demographic transition, population growth, population aging, related to that, the epidemiological transition, so changes in global disease burden. You can say underlying, another layer under that is the changes in these lifestyle and nutrition and habits. And I'm gonna also, yes, briefly show those patterns that are described in the nutrition transition. So indeed coinciding with economic and demographic changes. So you could say, yeah, from the pattern of hunter-gatherer, so highly active lifestyles, relatively healthy diets. We moved, so again in time, but also different countries in different phases, to more early agriculture. So people living together, actually not so healthy in the beginning because low variation in foods. Famine is common, so if you lose a year, then you have a lot of problems with nutrient deficiencies, actually also more infectious diseases because people start living together with animals, for example, and in small groups. Then this increased further end of famine pattern, how it's described by Popkin. Famine recedes, income rises, so there's more a diverse pattern of food because markets, so we don't rely on our only single crop so well, it's a more diverse and a healthy dietary pattern. Then we go here already, the fourth, overeating, the Western diets. So incomes continue to rise with some more abundance of high calorie foods, increasing sedentary lifestyle. So therefore, so increase in obesity and all these lifestyle related chronic diseases. So you could plot these also, these patterns, right, in time, corresponding with the epidemiological transition. Yeah, also here, what would be the next pattern? Where will we go, or where are we? Any? Let's see if you're optimistic or pessimistic also in this. Hopefully less obesity, better lifestyle. Well, let's see indeed, hopefully, at least that's, we do see responses to that, right? So we observe, okay, this obesity and then NCDs is increasing, we should do something about it. I'm not sure if we're on the right track yet of how to tackle this, but let's say there's a pattern of behavior change. So we know it's a lot based on behavior in our environments. So this is also like maybe the typical US having an escalator to go to your gym. But so response to increasing rates of obesity, school programs to increase physical activity. So there are responses there, and let's see, let's hope indeed this will lead to healthier lifestyles overall and less obesity. Then if we see these patterns, where do you think we are currently in the Netherlands? Just a number then of these 5 patterns. Four, five, between 4 and 5, yeah. So I think most of us agree we're sort of here or here. And then let's see, and okay, now let's get there later. Or here. So that's let's say a good thing. We're moving to 4 to 5, but actually most parts of the world, low-income countries, are actually now shifting mainly from 3 to 4 still, right? So different countries again in different transitions. So many are shifting here from actually quite healthy traditional diets to these Western lifestyles. And here we're moving indeed more from 4 to 5. I think what's interesting So there was some variation need 4, 5. You could say even within, because the Netherlands, of course, is still also a diverse population, even within, you could say that some socioeconomic groups or parts of the Netherlands maybe more in 4, others maybe more in 5. And what we generally see also is higher socioeconomic status are the ones transitioning first, right? So we have so those with higher incomes, higher education levels in the Netherlands are more faster moving to 5, so having healthier lifestyles. So indeed, we see also now that obesity is becoming more linked to a lower socioeconomic status, for example. In the US, that's very clear now. But in developing countries where the shift is going from 3 to 4, we see the same, that those with higher socioeconomic status are the first transitioning, but actually they're so moving faster from a healthy traditional pattern to a more Western pattern. So it's not necessarily healthier, to be upfront. But that's also what we used to see in the Netherlands and in the US, where originally obesity was more a disease of wealth, right? So you can afford a plenty of food and you can afford not to have to just sit and not be physically active. So we were now transitioning from 4 to 5, and again, it becomes more, better socioeconomic status reflection if you're less obesity, but in other stages, parts of the world, it's the same, but then obesity may be still seen as also wealthy. I'm sure many of you also have, like, or used to have grandparents that are like, you should eat more. That's a good thing. If you're talking about you're too skinny, right? People should eat more. So it's another generation being a bit more, even, and it's a scary thing, mainly with childhood obesity and in developing countries where there were parents or grandparents still used to having undernutrition or not having enough, and then stimulating, of course, maybe too much excess. So we see some issues there. But okay, moving time-wise and moving on. This fast transition is leading also to a double burden, both in disease and lifestyle. Probably you heard of double burden of disease, also dual burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases. There's also this double burden of malnutrition, both under and over nutrition still. And also because of these fast transitions, this is happening a lot in low middle income countries. I'm not going to go there. So that's within countries. So you can have countries, let's say here South Africa, that have to deal with still significant levels of stunting, for example, due to micronutrient deficiencies in early life, but also a lot of overweight and obesity. So there's a lot of CVD, but also still TB and HIV/AIDS. So you have to, as a government, also, where do you invest in what health policies? You have this double burden to take into account diseases. Even within individuals, scary thing. So what we see a lot in developing countries is overweight in combination with micronutrient deficiencies. So it's too much, but low quality food. But also, here is an example, Mexico. Until the 80s, actually, there was a lot of undernutrition, but currently it's #1 in the world when it comes to childhood overweight and obesity. So there are actually adults who used to, who suffered from stunting, so they didn't grow they're fully in height when they were young because they didn't have enough food. But 1 or 2 decades later, there's plenty of food, so they're even at higher risk of obesity. So this even further increased risk because of their stunting in early life. So double burden even within individuals. Yes. And of course, they're all related again. So we've seen demographic, epidemiological, and nutrition transition. Here all in the path together. And I'd like to wrap up with that because I think, you listened to long enough already, listening to lectures online. Global health and disease, what we discussed so far. We've seen this unfinished, maybe emerging agenda of infectious diseases, but an emerging agenda of non-communicable diseases, and that's all related to demographic change. We've seen this epidemiological transition and underlying also these lifestyle changes. So we saw in the beginning, life expectancy has been increasing a lot in the past, well, even centuries. And you also mentioned, like, indeed, a major determinant of that may have been better hygiene, antibiotics, etc. So tackling determinants of infectious diseases. So I could say if we want to continue increasing our health or life expectancy, then now we have to tackle determinants of major risk factors for death now. And then we have, oops, those are non-communicable diseases, and major risk factors are also lifestyle. So those are the factors we need to tackle now to keep our global health up, and maybe keep the trends, well, as the trend continue. And because these transitions are occurring rapidly in several parts of the world, we also see a double burden of those diseases. So it's also important to take into account. So there's still, we need to focus on infectious diseases, undernutrition, while preventing these unhealthy lifestyle changes towards obesity and non-communicable diseases. Yes. Okay. And I think that was our capital start, but that was it from my side for today. Are there any other questions or thoughts related to this? Not, I'll wait a little bit if there's anything in the chat or anything you want to discuss. I think I can share the slides and maybe some of the articles if you want to, and links. So I think I really like the article indeed about the Omran for the epidemiological transition, for example, and Barry Popkin on the nutrition transition. And I think also for your projects and hopefully your visits to your country. I think I understood it's now going to be next summer, hopefully, to look into indeed. So how is that country doing in terms of major causes of death, diseases, but also trends in the last maybe 10, 20 years? Do you also see indeed these strong increases in non-communicable diseases or not yet? What are the major determinants? How are obesity rates, for example, diet, physical activity? And what are also the policies of the country? Are they still mainly tackling infectious diseases, or are they also moving towards preventing cardiovascular and other non-communicable diseases? And is that in line, do you think, is that with the data you see? So also, yeah, there's some links in my slides that you could use to look that up. They're quite good, it's quite good data on that. And then if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any other questions later, then just send me an email. Yeah, have a good day.
Thank you very much, Trudy.